What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Absolute Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Hunt, back with another episode. And today we're going to talk about 5 fitness mistakes I wish I avoided in my early years when I first started training. And I got to tell you how this podcast came about. It actually originated from an email I received from a young kid about 2 weeks ago. Speaking of which, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. It's just kylehuntfitness@gmail.com. I try my best to answer everybody who hits me up. But this kid sent me an email and essentially said, "Hey, Kyle, I know you've been training a long time. I know you started training when you were young. I'm 16, been training for a year and a half. What are some mistakes you made during your high school years, teenage years, that you wish you avoided?" And when I started thinking about it, because I want to think about this and provide a good answer. And initially, I'm like, I know I've done a podcast on this. And I didn't even go back to look. I'm sure I've done, we're almost at 300 episodes of the podcast. I think I've done some type of, hey, here's the mistakes I made type of podcast before. But, I wanted to, one, give a detailed answer for this kid, not just say, oh, listen to this podcast. I wanted to give him a good answer. But then two, I know I haven't answered this question recently. And over time, our perception of what we did in our early years, or really our perception of everything changes. Our perception changes over time. So I almost guarantee that these are 5 different things. Maybe that just means I made a lot of mistakes. Possibly. Then I started answering this question. I was like, oh, these are really good things to avoid. These are mistakes that people might not initially think of. And, what's interesting, the true answer is I don't know if I would have listened to myself. When I wrote my first book, Bodybuilding for Beginners, that book was the book I wish I had when I first started training. And as I was writing that book, one of the things that was front and center on my mind was, okay, let's write a book with the information in it that I needed when I first started training, but also try to write a book that also spoke to who I was when I first started training. Would I actually read it and understand it and actually believe in it enough to accept the information? I did that especially with the training program in Bodybuilding for Beginners, because with beginner programs, a lot of times they're just full body 3 days a week, and that works really well. But I knew myself, who was interested in bodybuilding, and that's in the title, Bodybuilding for Beginners. When I first started training when I was a teenager, I was interested in bodybuilding. Not necessarily competitive bodybuilding, but bodybuilding in the sense of I want to build muscle, I want to get jacked, want to get lean, want to be shredded. Like, I wanted to build my body. So the information I was getting was from the bodybuilding magazines and stuff like that. So if you would have told 15-year-old Kyle, like, hey, dude, here's your program. It's a 3-day-a-week full body routine. I would have said, thanks, but no thanks. Let's get rid of that. I don't want to do that. So I try to make Bodybuilding for Beginners, it's an upper-lower split, a little bit of what you need, but also a little bit of what you want to. I'm going to throw in some of those accessories just because you want to do them. And I made a bunch of little mistakes with my training, made a bunch of little mistakes with my nutrition. If I would have had a little bit more guidance, I definitely could have made faster progress during my early years of training. But, man, making all those mistakes and learning the hard way, which learning the hard way might be the best way to learn. It's nice to be able to skip those hard steps. That's why I like reading books, and you can get all the information. It's a great value. You can almost learn from someone else's experience, not only their knowledge, but the mistakes they made. That's essentially what I've done with my books is, hey, I've been doing this a really long time. Here you go. Here's the information. Here's only what you need to know. I filtered it all through. Go to town. But part of learning, in my opinion, is also making mistakes. And it doesn't matter how educated you are. You're going to make mistakes in training. You're going to make mistakes in nutrition. You absolutely are. I think it's important. But with that being said, if you can avoid some of these mistakes, these particular mistakes, I think you'll be much better off. All right, but before we get to the episode, a couple things. One, this podcast is sponsored by PR Breaker, the pre-workout and protein powder I use and recommend. I've been crushing the grape candy lately, the new flavor of materia, and I have to say, shit, man, I think the grape might be, it's like, if it's not tied with sour green apple as my favorite flavor, it's like the closest second you could possibly be. Like, the grape, like I've said this whole time, I don't want to hype it up too much, but the grape it's blown my mind even before it even came out. Like even early on, it blew my mind during the taste test because I'm just not a big fan of grape normally, but this grape is next level. PRBreaker.com. Use the discount code HUNT10. Help save yourself some money. Help support the Absolute Strength podcast. Get yourself some pre-workout. Try the new grape. Green apple's amazing. Blue raz is amazing as well. Cotton candy and the caffeine-free orange. If you happen to train late at night, you know how I feel about caffeine. Has a long half-life. If you're training after work, like you're probably going to want a caffeine-free pre-workout. You don't want your sleep affected by taking a pre-workout at 7 o'clock at night. Like if you have to train at night, that's one of the downsides. But you can also, go back and listen to my caffeine episode, because one of the things I talk about in that is there's actually a way to still take advantage of caffeine. If you almost like front load it a little bit and take advantage of the half-life, it's not going to be, quote, optimal. It won't be as great as taking 2 scoops of pre-workout right before you start lifting. But there is a way to still take a pre-workout and still take advantage of caffeine training later in the day. But right beforehand, if you train after work, you're going to want a caffeine-free. Then it doesn't matter when you train or what you do, protein powder is just, it's more than even a supplement. It's like a food item that I recommend to pretty much everybody, because protein powder is a struggle for most people. Now, right off the bat in this episode, we're going to talk about getting in a lot of protein was not a struggle for me early on, but it is a struggle for most people, and you can't go wrong with the convenience of a protein powder, especially when it tastes great. Once again, PRBreaker.com. Use the discount code HUNT10. Save yourself some money. Help support the show. Other than that, guys, you got my programs. You got the OG Absolute Strength program available on the website. Link is in the show notes. You got the Absolute Progress Powerbuilding program. Best of both worlds. Build a little muscle, gain some strength. That is in the show notes as well, along with bench press specialization programs and a few other programs you can pick up at the website kylehuntfitness.com, or just, like I said, click the link in the show notes. Last but not least, guys, I'm a coach. I know as gyms start opening back up, I know things have been crazy. The first half of 2020, the second half of the year can be better. We're literally, June's coming to an end. We got 6 months left. I know a lot of people, they've just packed it in. Like I said last time, in the last episode, a lot of people just packed in this year. They're already looking ahead, 2021. I don't know about you. I don't want to waste 6 months. Well, actually, this time off has done my body good, both physically and mentally. Like I'm ready to get after it. I'm ready to get after it. And I've built my little garage gym, so that's where I'm going to be for probably the rest of the year. And I know some people haven't been able to do that, but I think more equipment's going to become available if you do want to go that route. And if not, gyms are opening up in some areas. Some areas are getting kind of like the second wave. It's not even a second wave, but it's like the first, like where I live in South Carolina, we didn't get it bad a couple months ago, but now it's getting crazy here. Like the cases are shooting up. I know it's the same thing in Florida, so depending on where you live. But if you happen to be in a spot where gyms are opening up and you want help to get back after it and take advantage of the second half of 2020, send me an email, kylehuntfitness@gmail.com, or just click the coaching link in the show notes. Let's get you set up. Let's take things to the next level. Let's like really get after it, because 6 months is a long time. You don't want to be one of those people that say, I'll start in January. January is too far away. All right, let's get to this episode. 5 mistakes I made early on in my fitness journey. What are they? All right, 5 mistakes. So the first mistake, this one might surprise you right off the bat. Right off the bat here, number 1 might surprise you. Eating too much protein. Yeah, I was like obsessed with protein. Starting early on too. And I think this is something that there was 2 things. 2 big things that played a part in this. And the first one was just the bro culture and clean eating. Clean eating was, I was such a bro when I first started. I'm talking really pretty much this, kind of give you guys a timeline of what I'm talking about within this entire podcast is pretty much, so when I first started lifting was after my 8th grade wrestling year, I started lifting, and then didn't take it that serious until probably late that summer into my freshman year of high school. Like my freshman year of high school, that's when I was like full steam ahead, all about it, all just completely obsessed with training, like reading everything I get my hands on, just learning about nutrition, training, everything. But I was a bro. I was looking at all the bodybuilding stuff, and tracking macros wasn't really a thing. Like, yeah, I knew about macros, I knew about macronutrients, I knew. And what's even interesting is I knew, like, oh yeah, everyone says about 1 gram per pound of body weight, but then even some of the bodybuilders would start recommending 1.5, even like up to 2 grams per pound of body weight. But of course, I wasn't tracking anything. It was just clean eating. So I had really no idea how much protein I was taking in. I just knew protein was good. All the bodybuilders recommend eating it. So that's what we'll do. And then as I got more educated, I really didn't change my stance, because the more educated I got, actually, I learned a lot about protein. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, they seem to have this right. Like, protein's really good. Like, higher protein intake helps blunt hunger. Protein is, in terms of thermic effect of feeding, is a little bit higher than the other macronutrients. Like, that's good. You need to eat a lot of protein to build muscle. Like, man, this is just all good things. And then here's the 2 things that really affected how much protein I was eating. One is thinking about meal timing throughout the day. So by the time I took this, again, during this time, that's a myth all in of itself. Like, the idea that you need protein timed out perfectly at certain points in the day almost automatically leads you to eating too much protein. So, like, wake up and you have breakfast, and I would eat like a normal breakfast, and then like a normal lunch. But then, like, everyone was recommending, like, oh, you need protein pre-workout. So I'd have like an extra protein shake, like a scoop of protein pre-workout, and then, oh, you absolutely have to have a scoop of protein after you work out. Like, that's just, I mean, you absolutely have to. Like, at the time, that's what I thought. Like, you got to have that post-workout protein shake, or the workout's wasted. So you got the pre-workout, the post-workout, and then you'd want to have some protein specifically before bed too. You got to have that slow digesting casein protein or cottage cheese or something like that. So by the time you have a pre, post, before bed, and then you're still eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, especially because I was small too. Like, I'm talking, I mean, my sophomore year of high school, I still wrestled 96 and 103 pounds. So I'm, at most in the off season, like 115. So 1 gram per pound of body weight, 115 grams of protein, like, that goes really, really quick when you're having a scoop pre, a scoop post. There's 50. Something before bed, there's 75 at least. And then you're still eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, probably getting 30, 40 at each meal. Like, I'm a 115-pound kid eating well over 200 grams of protein. Like, that was just too much. And it isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Like, looking back, like, it wasn't, like, terrible. But here's the second part of it. The second part of it was I was trying to be really lean, so my calories were really low. So I was pretty much there was a certain point when I was pretty much just, like, eating, like, protein and veggies. Like, my calories were just really, really low. So what would happen is I would get really hungry. And since I wasn't tracking anything, I was pretty much basing my nutrition, quote, clean eating, on the food choices I could have. And I would still, I didn't just eat, like, protein veggies. I'd still have, like, the quality carb sources, but I would limit myself on food selection so much. It would be like protein, essentially, I looked at it as unlimited, and then you can have, like, maybe oatmeal in the morning, rice at lunch, and, like, that's your carbs, and then vegetables at all the other times. So I'd be absolutely starving. So what I would do is I would just increase protein. Like, I'd be starving at dinner, and I'd be like, okay, well, I've already used my carbs for the day. I've already had my breakfast carbs and my lunch carbs, and then maybe like a carb post-workout. So at dinner, it's like, well, I can't have any more carbs. I don't really want to eat a ton of veggies. I have a bunch of grilled chicken here. I probably only need like 3 or 4 ounces, but I'm starving, so I'll eat like 8 to 10 ounces. So then, if you really calculated it out, on a normal day, I'd probably, just looking at the diet as a whole, would probably be over 200 grams of protein, which is too much for a 115-pound kid. But then on days I was hungry, it was probably like 250 grams of protein. So the big issue comes in, and this is kind of the take-home point for people, and I think this is a message that even today that people still they take something that's good, which is getting in protein. And after working with hundreds and hundreds of people, one of the reasons why I recommend protein shakes is because for the vast majority of people, protein intake is an issue. Like, they just don't. Most people do not get in enough protein. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people, and that's something that nutritionally probably is the easiest fix that makes the biggest difference. Is like, look, you're just not getting enough protein. Let's start making it a priority to have a protein source with every single meal. Let's add in a protein shake once or twice a day. Boom, we took care of it. It's that now that issue is taken care of. That's most people's problem. Now, if you grew up in the era I did and was really into bodybuilding, essentially being a bro, if you were a bro, you had the opposite issue. And I actually wrote about this in an article on protein way back in the day, maybe like in 2013. And I talked about how I thought most fitness people actually ended up eating too much protein. I saw this a lot with my women clients that would come in and they'd compete in whether it was figure or bikini. And they had the same exact issue I had when I was young. Is they didn't weigh much, they only weighed like 120 pounds, 130 pounds, and they weren't eating a lot of food, like a variety of foods. They're pretty much eating clean diets, so they only had a limited amount of food choices, and they would always be hungry, and they knew protein was good, so they would just end up eating way too much protein. You'd have these girls come in, and they're eating like over 200 grams of protein, feeling like shit, and always tired. And I'm like, look, two things. One, we got to get your calories up a little bit. And two, you don't need that much protein. Like, let's replace some of that protein and throw in more carbohydrates. You're going to feel better. You're going to perform better. And if you perform better, your physique's going to look better. Protein isn't a great energy source. You don't want to be living off protein. That's what's been so funny when people talk about the carnivore diet. And they're like, oh, I'm going to do this carnivore diet for a long time. Like, are you an idiot? Like, it's an elimination diet. It's an elimination diet. You eliminate everything besides red meat, fish, eggs probably. I think that's like what you can have. You eliminate everything. And then once you find out maybe what the issue was, maybe whatever it's autoimmune issues, gut issues, whatever, you can reintroduce foods. It shouldn't be, I'm just gonna prioritize red meat, eggs, and fish, and that's it. Chicken, meat. I'm just eating meat the rest of my life. I'm just gonna get everything I need from that. And trust me, I'm a big proponent of red meat. I'm a big proponent of all meats. But it shouldn't be the only thing you eat. It's just you're never going to have an elite athlete, someone who's performing at their best, and they say, like, they come off the football field and they're like, man, yeah, hey, so I know you just won the Super Bowl, but what was your diet like? Well, for one, they would never ask that question. But if they did, you'd never have someone say, yeah, you know what, I just did the carnivore diet. What do you know? Like, felt the best I ever did in my life. Just ate red meat. Done it all year. No, you wouldn't. And there's a reason for that. Because protein is not a great energy source. It's a great macronutrient, probably the most important for building muscle and strength and performance. But if you're using it for your energy sources, so if you're having way too much, once you get above like 1.2, 1.3 grams per pound of body weight, like, there's no more benefit. There's no more benefit going over that. Like, and if you're worried about hunger, throw in some green veggies. You're going to get a better bang for your buck that way. And when we look at it from a calorie standpoint, when you're eating a shitload more protein than what you need, the problem is those calories have to come from somewhere. So in order to stay in a caloric deficit, what you're doing is you're just eliminating carbs and fats, which are way better energy sources. And yes, we get it. Yeah, protein promotes fullness better than the other macronutrients. Protein is probably even hard. Well, not probably, it is. It's harder to gain fat with a surplus of protein versus the other macronutrients. But again, when you're tracking everything and you have your diet in check, if you're eating 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, you'd be much better off dropping that down to 1 gram per pound of body weight and take those extra calories that you save in the protein and excess that you're getting rid of and distribute that in carbs and fats. Your calorie intake is going to be the same. Your protein intake is going to be lower, but it's still going to be optimal, quote, optimal for what you need. And you're going to throw in the carbs and fats, still in a deficit, still eating the same amount of calories. Protein's still optimal to build muscle, gain strength, but you're going to feel better, perform better, because you're able to utilize carbohydrates and fats, which are much better energy sources. So that was the big problem I had early on. I ate way too much protein, and it just I never really optimized how I felt, because I was just using protein calories to sustain myself, which isn't ideal. Another thing that I just thought about, which affected me back then, definitely, that also added to why I was consuming more protein than I probably even realized, was I also was taking branched chain amino acids. Yeah, they're free form amino acids, so you don't technically have to put a caloric value on the label, but they still have a caloric value. That's still protein. You're still taking in protein, even if it's free form amino acids from a branched chain amino acid. So if you're taking a couple scoops of BCAAs and putting it in a gallon jug and drinking it all day long, you might be taking in an extra 10, 20 grams of protein. Something to think about. Amino pills. I used to take those at one time. They were kind of like essential amino acid pills. Don't think I ever really took them enough to really add up. But what I definitely took that added up was the liver tabs. This is a supplement that it's gone away for good reason. Like, it's not popular anymore. But for a time, I think Vince Garando, like way back in the day, like originally promoted it and got it popular. And then for some reason, it had like a resurgence in like the mid 2000s, taking not amino tabs, the liver tabs. And I actually was even up until when I was in maybe like a freshman in college, I used to take the liver tabs because at the time I actually was a distributor for a supplement company called Beverly International, and they actually have pretty good products. I mean, it's a little overpriced, but the protein powders taste good and whatnot. But anyway, I was a distributor for them, selling their supplements, and that was like probably my first entrepreneurial venture. Although, it was like 2010. It was probably the same time I started Hunt Fitness. So yeah, it was like right around the same time I was starting the online thing. I was selling, because I was doing personal training in the gym, and that's why I started selling the supplements, because I would sell it to my clients and then sell it to other members of the gym. But anyway, long story short is I would take 1 or 2 of these liver tabs per meal, and they were 1 gram of protein per pill. So let's say I was eating 5 meals a day, 2 per meal. I mean, shit, that adds up every day. 2 scoops of branched chain amino acids, 2 liver tabs per meal. I mean, that could be an extra 20 grams of protein a day right there. So to wrap this point up, really most people should be consuming between 0.8 and 1.2 grams per pound of body weight of protein, and really the happy medium, 1 gram per pound of body weight. Like, it should be pretty close to that, or unless you're pretty heavy. If you're 30% body fat, something like that, you can get away with less protein and basing your protein intake more off from a lean body mass number than your overall body weight. But there's no real reason for anybody to be much over 1 gram per pound of body weight ever. I mean, even deep into a diet, I mean, maybe you could make an argument for 1.2. I mean, that's really the spot. But like I said, within reason, a little bit extra protein is not a bad thing. From a hunger standpoint, it's not a bad thing. And really from a fat accumulation standpoint, a little bit more protein is not a bad thing. It's really what we want to avoid is just having excessive amount of protein. That's where the real issue is. Once it starts cutting into your overall calories, once it starts cutting into the amount of carbs and fats you can have, once it starts becoming an energy source, that's when you're having an issue, because that's what we want to avoid. Again, we also want to avoid just eating a ton of protein, and then if we're still eating a bunch of carbs and fats too, and just eating a bunch of protein on top of it, I mean, it's just going to be extra calories when we're in a surplus that just is extra, like, that we don't need. It's like more protein is not going to help you build more muscle. Like, you're going to get diminishing returns at a certain point. All right, next thing on the list is doing too much junk volume. And we actually talked about junk volume a little bit in the last episode, the episode on myo reps, which has got quite a lot of good feedback. I'm glad you guys enjoyed that one. That was a fun episode to do. But in that episode, we talked about junk volume a little bit. And in the quest is just to add a ton of volume into your training, what happens is you almost start pacing yourself. And really what I would define junk volume is volume that's just not that effective. So we know that in order to build muscle from a hypertrophy standpoint, we got to be semi close to failure. We don't have to train to failure, but if we get too far away from failure, we don't see quite the same muscle building response. And thinking back, I really had to think about this because there was a time, kind of the old school approach was taking sets to pretty much failure. Like that's how, I mean, the old school approach was pretty much like, hey, you gotta, if you're doing a set, you pretty much take it right till you can't do another one. Like that's just, I mean, that's the mindset in the gym. Like you go in and you go right to failure. And then what was still pretty popular was the beyond failure training. So the Dorian Yates style, the Mike Mentzer style, where you would do, you go till you can't do anymore, and then you'll do either like a drop set or forced reps with a partner or rest, pause, whatever. Like everything was like intensity techniques. Like that was really popular. That was even really popular in the bodybuilding magazines at the time when I was first getting into lifting early on in high school. Like the intensity principles. Like I remember reading about that, and that was like put on a pedestal. Like that was like advanced stuff. And of course, when you're young, you think, oh, you always think that you're more advanced than you really are. And I just remember thinking like, oh, these like set extending techniques, like they must be really valuable. Like drop sets, rest, pause, things like that, like forced reps. It must be super important. So I did go through a period of time where I did a lot of that stuff, where I trained to failure and then did a lot of like intensity techniques. And then at some point I started reading and becoming more intelligent, like moving in the right direction, in my opinion, and starting to recognize like, oh, like actually volume tends to be what's most important. Like the total amount of work that you're doing, like that's actually a little bit more important than these intensity principles that everyone's talking about. Like actually the total amount of work for building muscle is what's important. And even on top of that, like going to absolute failure is not even needed. Great, this is good. So what started as moving in the right direction eventually led to going in the wrong direction, and really, again, starting to look at these programs that were in the bodybuilding magazines, and even kind of reversing and going back and looking at the programs in like Arnold's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, and combining that with different bodybuilding programs that I found online or found in the magazines, and really what they all had in common was just an absolute shitload of volume. So I was like, okay, I just replicated those. I just started replicating those programs with, it wasn't even a program, it was just lists of exercises, and just continued adding stuff, and then pretty much just put it, essentially just like reverse engineered it. It's like, okay, I have 2 hours to spend in the gym. How much can I do in 2 hours? Like, and that's what my workout is. Like, how much can I actually fit in? So what you almost end up doing is you end up pacing yourself. It's almost like if you know you're going into like a marathon 2-hour lifting session, it's like, okay, how am I going to make, especially when you're a high school kid, like you've only been training a few years, like it's like, how are you going to make it to the end? Like, how are you going to make it through this? You have a list of 12 different exercises you want to do. You're hoping you can do those in 2 hours, maybe even more, maybe like 15 exercises or whatever. So what do? You end up pacing yourself. You end up just not really pushing yourself all that hard in terms of each set. Like each set becomes not very hard. And then the second level to that, and this is what probably was influenced more by the bodybuilding magazines and the bodybuilders when they would put their programs in there. One of the things I would notice, it was a lot of assistance exercises. Like mostly like all these like fancy machines and cables and like using the machines like not even how they were supposed to be used, to like hit the muscle from a different angle and all this stuff that's bullshit. Like it's not really how you make good progress, especially as a teenager. This really held me back. Like thinking all volume was equal and thinking that all exercises were equal. So in my head it was all, and I never really actually like probably thought this out loud, but subconsciously just what I was gathering was like, okay, well, I could do 3 sets of squats and do that, or I can just do 3 sets of like a leg press or a hack squat or leg extension, leg curls. The volume's the same, so why am I going to push myself hard on squats? I'll just do all these machines, these funky machines and shit, and load up my volume that way. So the junk volume comes in two ways. The junk volume comes in the sets not being very hard. They're not close enough to failure to really be effective. If a set's easy, it's probably further away from failure than you even think it is. One, especially when you're not that experienced. So I was getting hit that way. And then secondly, my actual exercise selection turned into junk volume when you end up doing a bunch of exercises that aren't as effective, like leg extensions and calves and abs. I was big on doing a bunch of ab stuff and cables, like all the cable machines, cable flies, and stuff like that. No exercise is inherently bad. Like, you could make an argument for almost any exercise, and I've done damn near every exercise, and I've programmed almost every exercise for clients in certain situations. This isn't a battle of, like, oh, I'm saying certain exercises are terrible or useless, because I don't actually think that. I think there's some that are better than others, and I think some are more applicable in most circumstances than others. But where I have a problem is when you're a teenager, and I'm speaking to what I did, is when I was a teenager and you start prioritizing like leg extensions, leg curls, and things like that over squats, deadlifts. Because I went through a very brief period, and this isn't something I actually did for a long time. I caught myself probably when I was like 16. This was probably like my sophomore year of high school. And it was also coincided, and probably this actually had a lot to do with it now that I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I was cutting a bunch of weight that year for wrestling. So I had like no energy. And I was reading about training, like that volume is so important. So that's really the year I'm talking about, actually. Like 2000, like I don't even know what the year was, but my sophomore year of high school, probably 2006. I think that was the year. My 10th grade year was the year that, because I was cutting a bunch of weight, I had like no energy. And then I'm reading about how volume's so important that I was like, screw it. I'll just do a bunch of machines, a bunch of cable exercises, and just still work hard. Like, it wasn't like I was just going through the motions. Like, I was still working hard. It just was way too much and not hard enough on any one thing to make the training actually progressive. It was just go in, try to do as much stuff as I possibly could, and just jam as many exercises in 2 hours as I possibly could, accumulate a ton of volume, and that's what I did. And it wasn't great. It wasn't great. I wish I would have just went in and said, oh, you know what? I should be spending a lot more time squatting than I spend doing machines. I should be spending a lot more time benching and doing rows and doing pull-ups and things like that than I'm doing on the cables and on the machines. But again, it's a mistake that you almost have to learn to correct. Because what also was funny that year is I remember now it's all coming together for me, because so I was cutting a lot of weight that year and I started doing a lot more machines and cables. And I remember, like, after the wrestling season, like, I went back to do bench, and like my bench was like weak as shit. Like, I remember it might have been like actually went back like to the beginning to when I first started lifting. Like, I remember like 95 to using like 95 for like working sets. And I was like, what the hell happened? Like, I was stronger than, like, the beginning of the year, I was like benching like 195. Like, that summer, that summer before my sophomore year, I actually was doing a lot of heavy lifting. So it was really that school year that I started learning about volume, and my training went completely in the toilet. And then it probably took me like another 6 months after that to bring it back around. So yeah, it's funny. It's funny how that works. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is chronic dieting. And this is something that kind of fast forward through the years a little bit. This really affected me probably like my junior and senior year of high school. So later on, probably more even like my senior year. I was learning more about fitness and training, and I was getting my training pretty much dialed in. I was learning a lot about nutrition. I was learning more about bodybuilding and becoming more interested in like competitive bodybuilding and wanting to be really lean and shredded. I thought that was really, really important. So what I started doing was pretty much just always being in a caloric deficit. And I think really what happened is because, and there was a big shift in my mindset around training, like my senior year of high school. Because up until that point, I had always been wrestling. So my diet and my weight and my conditioning and everything was predicated on the weight class I was in. So I never really, I wanted to be lean and I wanted to be as big as I could be for the weight class. But again, I was held to the weight class. I was like, I wanted to be at this specific weight class. So what do I have to do to my nutrition and my training to be as big as I possibly can during the wrestling season and make weight for, my matches. But then after wrestling was over, I'm a senior in high school, school year's coming to the end. I'm really interested in bodybuilding. I decided I wasn't wrestling anymore. I wasn't going to wrestle in college. Like, I'm no longer tied to any weight class. Like, what do I want to do? It's like, well, I just want to be, screw it. I don't care how much I weigh. I just want to be as shredded as possible. I'll just be, which kind of seems counterintuitive. You're like, okay, well, don't you think if you're like cutting weight for a weight class, like you want to, like that would be as shredded as you're going to be. But yeah, but not necessarily, because like I said, part of, in any weight class sport, you want to be as big as you can for the weight class. Now that means being lean, but you don't want to get too lean, because then you have problems. Because then what it takes to be super lean is not going to be optimal performance. Like when you look at like a bodybuilder not stepping on stage, like they're not they're super shredded, but they're not in the condition to compete in a sport. Like it's just, they're two different things. Like that's why most athletes, even professional athletes, like they're not bodybuilder lean. Like they would have to still lose 10, 15 pounds. Like even like lean, really lean athletes. Like it's always funny when you see, it's always like NFL guys, especially in the summer. It's always like NFL guys in the summer when one of their like strength coaches will test them, and they probably will test them, and it'll give them like a crazy low number. It'll be like, oh, I'm 3% body fat or 2.5% body fat. And I remember Le'Veon Bell a couple years ago, and I know he trains at Pete Bomarito's place down in Florida. I had Pete on the podcast early on. He's an awesome dude. But anyway, I remember Le'Veon Bell was down there training one summer, and he posted on Instagram, like, yeah, it turns out, and he posted like a video, like a picture of him flexing. He's like, yeah, it turns out I'm like 2.6% body fat, shredded this summer. And everyone's commenting like, oh, dude, you're so shredded. And I'm like, yeah, dude, he's pretty lean, but he's like 12% body fat. That's still good. And then, of course, you get like attacked from all the fans, like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're right. He's 2.7% body fat, but guys step on stage in a bodybuilding stage at like 5 or 6, but you're right. But anyway, it's funny, but they don't need to be. A professional athlete doesn't need to be bodybuilder lean, and they shouldn't be bodybuilder lean. It's just, that's not how to be at your best, is to be that shredded. But anyway, side tangent over. So what happened to me was I wanted to start competing in bodybuilding. But the problem that I had was I didn't really ever make it an intelligent plan, because it's like, this is when I'm like 17, 18. It was just like, I always wanted to, and this is a mistake that a lot of people get into, because this is exactly the mindset I had. And I've had a lot of clients over the years have this mindset, and it never really works out great, is the idea that it's like, oh, I want to prep for a bodybuilding show, but then maybe not even do the bodybuilding show, but be capable of doing a bodybuilding show. It's just not very effective. Like, that's not a real good idea. If you want to do a bodybuilding show, pick a date and then prep for it and like plan it out. Like, actually make a big plan. Like, it's probably going to be like a whole year's worth of planning, like your off season, pre-contest, diet break, and then final push for the diet. Like, you want to take a significant period of time to prep to be at your best, especially when you're young, especially when it's your first time. Like, you definitely wouldn't want to just be like, oh, I'm going to not put a date on the calendar and just diet like I'm going to do one, but then maybe never do one, and then just kind of maintain being super shredded or maybe a couple pounds away from stage lean and then see what happens. Like, it's just not very successful. But that's the mindset I had at the time, like when I was like 17. And so what that would entail was doing like a lot of dieting, like super strict dieting, just an extreme fat loss diet, which, hey, you can have extreme fat loss diets. And then I would do that for like as long as I could handle it. And then I would realize like, oh, well, I'm not going to do a bodybuilding show right now for whatever reason. Let me just add some calories back in. So then I would add calories back in for a month, maybe 3 weeks, gain a couple pounds of body weight, maybe a little bit of body fat. At least I would maybe hold some water, glycogen or something, and be like, oh, I don't know if I look as good. Then get right back on the diet. And then it was a bad cycle. It'd be like 12 weeks of dieting, 3 weeks in a surplus. 12 weeks of dieting, 3 weeks in a surplus. And you just spin your wheels. You never make any progress. Like, you never build any muscle that way. You end up actually, because what happens is you end up dieting very, very strictly, and then throwing calories back in. When you throw calories back in, they end up not being very controlled. So it almost just becomes like a 3-week free-for-all. So then you only are in a surplus for 3 weeks, but you add way more body fat back on than you probably should. And that also triggers you wanting to get lean again. So then you jump right back on the diet, and then that's a bad cycle. It's a bad cycle you get into. And it's a problem that a lot of people have had over the years. A lot of people who I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of people to help overcome this issue, because it's damaging, and it really holds you back from making progress. And what ends up happening, if you end up doing this for long enough, luckily I caught myself and learned, and it really only bothered me for like a year, but it was probably about a year of not making any strength gains, not building much muscle, just because I was spinning my wheels. And if you do it long enough, what ends up happening is you severely restrict how much muscle you gain, severely restrict how much strength you gain, and then you end up not even really being that lean at the end of the day. So because what happens is then you end up throwing in so many calories during that period of time when you're not dieting that you almost have to spend a bunch of time losing it, and then it's not very effective. And I actually think that a form of this, maybe not quite as extreme, but a form of this actually hurts a lot of influencers. A lot of Instagram influencers, I think, they struggle with this. And not in the same sense of the cycling. It's more so thinking, and probably rightfully so, that they got to be lean all the time to post pictures on Instagram. Like, that's what their brand, that's what their following is built on, is being lean and showing their physique, which, again, that definitely works. Like, that's a way to build a brand. I mean, it might not be as lasting as other ways, but a lot of fitness influencers have built brands and built followings, maybe more followings than brands, but their personal brand. They're built their personal brand around being lean and looking the part. So what they end up doing is pretty much setting up their training and diet to maintain probably a little bit leaner than they should. And they may not chronic diet in the sense of cycling, like dieting for a long period of time and then being in a surplus for a short period of time, but they pretty much just stay in that caloric deficit for a very long time, and then they just don't spend a lot of time in a surplus actually building any muscle. So what happens is they pretty much end up looking the same. You end up pretty much looking the same all the time. And there's some fitness people that pretty much have looked the same, I don't know, for the last 4 or 5 years. and trust me, it's hard to build muscle. Naturally, it's hard to build muscle. So you want to give yourself every opportunity to build muscle. And the best way to build muscle and gain strength is to be in a caloric surplus, or at least at maintenance, at least at a point where, maybe it's a very small surplus where you're not really gaining much weight, not really gaining too much fat. And over the long term, if you're very consistent with your training and have everything else dialed in, you'll probably gain a little bit of muscle. And then from a body composition standpoint, you'll look better over 4 or 5 years, just because you've stayed right around your maintenance, maybe a slight surplus, and just been really dialed in with your training. Over time, that can work. But what I see is you can't, the problem with that is you can't maintain a maintenance if you're shredded. If you're like very, very lean, eating right around maintenance would just be very difficult, and it would be low calories, and that kind of middling method doesn't really work as well when you're super lean. You almost have to create your set point, and you almost have to do work to create your set point at a little bit leaner than what you currently are. So that's kind of a trick to body composition. Like, long-term improving your body composition is getting leaner, but then recomping to a spot where your set point, so your body fat set point's a little bit lower than what it was before. Like, that should be the goal, and then just try to maintain that. And hopefully the idea is that is easier to maintain eating right around maintenance, or maybe a slight surplus. Like, you can maintain that and still make progress. But when you're super lean, it's just what it requires to stay that lean isn't going to allow you to actually make progress in the gym or progress to your physique. And it's something that I think a lot of people issue. And, you know, I know when I was doing it, what it led to for me was just a really bad relationship with food. That's why I ended up doing like the whole like chronic dieting thing or deficit and then get out of a deficit because like, okay, well, I'm lean enough, but, you know, it's time for me to build muscle now. So I would actually actively like get out of a deficit because I knew like, hey, this isn't the best thing to do. I shouldn't be in this deficit for that long. But then what I would do is I would get out of the deficit, and as soon as I started gaining weight again, I had a bad relationship with food, so it's like I'd gain weight again, and then I'd be like, okay, well, I got to get back on the diet. Got to get lean again. And that's how that cycle continued for a short period of time. And then, like I said, probably about a year, and then I snapped out of it. The next thing I want to talk about is not beating the logbook or really having any type of built-in progression with my training. And it kind of stems off from doing too much junk volume, but really this was an issue I had pretty much the entire time I was, quote, bodybuilding style training. Is just I didn't really have any form of built-in progression. And it's debatable like how for strength training, periodization is essential. Like it's very, very important to have programming. Programming, periodization are different, but having a periodization structure, built-in progression, so you are moving in one direction over a period of time that has a built-in process of getting you better, getting you stronger. That's very, very important for strength training. Now, for muscle building, for bodybuilding, the research isn't quite as strong in terms of needing a very intricate periodization setup. But what is very, very important for building muscle is beating the logbook. And yes, it's a form of progressive overload, but just doing more work, more weight over time is very important. More reps, more weight, like just beating that logbook is critical. And when I didn't start doing this really until probably college, like my second year of college, really when I started getting very interested in strength training and performance training. That was when I really started lifting for strength, lifting for performance, like what I could actually do in the gym. Before that, it was mostly just aesthetics. And yes, this really wasn't an issue of, I was training for bodybuilding, so I didn't care how much I lifted. It was more so just, I didn't think about it. Like I was just training for the look and not training very good. I didn't prioritize beating the logbook. I probably even kept track of what I was doing, but I just didn't emphasize like going into the gym saying, okay, well, this is what I did last time. Let me try to beat that. Or let me try to add a rep. Let me try to whatever. Like just beat that logbook, beat the weight, do 5 pounds more, do an extra rep, etc. And, getting stronger over time is very, very important. Whether you're building muscle or gaining strength. Obviously, gaining strength, you want to get stronger if your goal is strength. But even for building muscle, it's very, very important. And what's interesting looking back is I really just majored in the minors. Like I put an emphasis on things in my training and nutrition, but mostly training here, that wasn't important, like the training split. Like I just put way too much emphasis on the training split. I know this is something I've talked about before, but it's a issue that people still have. Like, there's nothing wrong with push-pull legs. Like I love push-pull leg setups. I love upper-lower setups. I love many, even full body for some cases. There's many different ways to organize your training. But it's not so much how you organize it. It's really just how you organize it in a sense that allows you to perform the best and perform the volume you need to make progress, to build muscle, or whatever your goal is. The training split is really just a way of organizing your lifts and your body parts throughout the week. And there's many different ways to do it. And there's no real one way that's necessarily better. But at the time I did. And I put a lot of emphasis on, if I'm doing like push-pull legs, or then maybe I'll do like back and chest and shoulders and arms and legs, just like making the split was very, very important. Also, my exercise selection, like I put a lot of thought in my exercise selection, which again, nothing wrong with that, but I put a lot of emphasis on that. Like I spent a ton of time thinking like, oh, should I do this exercise or this exercise? And I would really think when I'm coming up with my program, like I would debate it in my head and spend a lot of time on it. And it just seems silly that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the secret split and the secret exercise to include. But I didn't emphasize progression. I didn't emphasize actually like beating my damn logbook, but I cared about what exercise I was doing over another. Like, and when I say that, I mean like assistance movements. Like I would spend a ton of thought on, all right, so my fourth exercise of my back routine, should I do a single arm cable row or a hammer strength low chest supported row? And I would like go back and forth. I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but it would be like, I would like make a big deal out of that, which in the grand scheme of things, like, okay, well, it probably just do one of them, pick one. Come on now, pick one. You can do the next one, the next training block. Like it's not that big of a deal, but in my head, I was like, I almost like ranked exercises, like in terms of, which is a complete contrast to what I trained early on. Like early on in my training career, like I said before, when I was in the junk volume stage, it was just ad exercises. So if I ever came to like 2 exercises, I couldn't figure out which one to do, I'd do both of them. But then towards, a few years in, probably like my junior, senior year of high school, even like my first year of college, I started lowering my volume, getting a little bit more intelligent with my training, starting to pay attention to my exercise selection a little bit more. Again, moving in the right direction, but still majoring in the minors, still thinking about things that weren't as important as just saying, pick an exercise, but while you're doing that exercise, make sure you do more weight or more reps than you did last time. Let's make some progressions in there. I just didn't do that. And that's probably one of the things thinking back, kind of big picture here is, damn, I wish I would have put a little bit more emphasis on that early on. The chronic dieting thing, going back, I mean, I wish someone would have just said, hey, you know what? You can always diet. Be in a caloric surplus for an extended period of time. Invest in your physique. Invest in your strength. Like that would have been so critical for me. Like that would have been very, very important if someone would have said those two things. Like, dude, go in and put a huge emphasis on your performance in the gym. Like, I know you're going to say like, oh, I don't want to be a powerlifter. I'm not training for strength. I'll care about my aesthetics. Like that's what's most important. I'll say, well, that's the key to your aesthetics. Beat the damn logbook. And then stay in a small caloric surplus. Don't chronic diet anymore. Like that would have been huge. And that would have took care of the junk volume thing. And then damn, if I wasn't eating too much protein and it was able to have some carbs too, I probably wouldn't have needed to eat so much protein. All right, last thing, then we'll wrap this episode up. And this kind of brings everything together. And number 5 is the fifth thing I put in that email, and the fifth thing we're going to talk about today is not emphasizing the rep enough. And what I mean by that is really my technique. I never really paid too much attention to my technique. I pretty much just looked at it as, hey, do you know how to do the exercise? Yes, no, pass, fail. If you do, good, great. You're good to go. If you don't, well, let me teach you or learn how to do it. And then if you do, you're good to go. And that's how I looked at my training. It was like once I figured out how to do an exercise, it was just, I know how to do it. I didn't put enough emphasis, again, probably until I was in college. Once I started putting a huge emphasis on strength and started powerlifting training and strength training, that was one of probably the best things that happened to me. As I started looking at, there's a lot of ways to do this. Like maybe I should look into actually improving how I bench press. Maybe I should look at optimizing my bench press. Maybe I should look at optimizing my squat, my deadlift, even other exercises, like how I do like a row. Maybe I should optimize how I do a row. That made a huge difference when I started doing that. It was like a night and day difference. I remember just my mindset around training changed. Like, and look around the gym. Even look on Instagram. Like, look at the people who you can tell how advanced someone is by how their reps look. Are they in complete control of the barbell or the dumbbell? Are they in complete control of it? Are they getting a full range of motion? Are they emphasizing a full range of motion? Are they working the muscle that they're intending to work? I think too many people just don't think about these things. It almost looks like they're in a rush to get through the set. Going into the gym, like when we're able to go back in the gym, but look around, look on Instagram. It seems like everyone's just in a huge rush to get through the set. It's like just checking off the box. Well, I did the set. Boom. I went hard on it. Yeah, but it was sloppy. It looked sloppy. And going back and looking, even when I first started making YouTube videos in like 2011, like even going back and looking at my training then, like damn, that was like probably my first couple years of college, right around the time when I started to make improvements from that point forward. But even looking back, like I'm like, damn, that's like hard to watch. Like that's like nails on a chalkboard watching those lifts. Like that just looks terrible. Of course, ego plays a big role into that. Ego, you wanna be handling as probably more weight than you're capable of doing, not using a full range of motion, using too much body angle or swinging and stuff like that. It's never the best way to go. It's better to, as bad as it is to say, as much as we don't want to hear this, we never want to hear it, but hey, use less weight and actually do it correctly. And I've probably mentioned this before, but I used to like watching the old bodybuilding DVDs, and I remember Mark Dugdale, who was an IFBB pro bodybuilder, he traveled over to England one time to train with Dorian Yates for a week, and they made a DVD out of it. And I remember one of the first workouts they did was a back workout. And, Dorian's like known for having a huge back. Like it was like one of his trademark body parts. And he was also known for barbell rows. Like they actually like you have like two forms of barbell row. You have the pendulum row, which is when you bring the bar all the way down to the ground and your body's more, your upper torso is more horizontal with the ground. That's a pendulum row. But then you have the Dorian Yates, which is called like a Yates row, where your upper body, your upper torso is like at a 45-degree angle with the floor, and the barbell doesn't touch the floor. It only, you pretty much lock yourself into like an RDL position and row a little bit lower towards your hips. A Yates row. And I remember Mark Dugdale they came into the gym to work out, and they were doing back, and I think maybe like the first exercise was barbell rows or second exercise or something. And Dorian was like, hey, how much weight do you normally use for barbell rows? And he was like, I don't know, like 405, 455. And Dorian's like, there's no way in hell you're using 405. You're not doing 4 plates. Like, there's no way you're barbell rowing 4 plates. Let's start with 225 and we'll go from there. And of course, he like made him slow down the tempo and like pause at the top, really contract it. And that DVD, specifically the back training in that DVD, really like that was like an eye opener for me. I was like, okay, all right, like maybe I'm going about this back training a little bit wrong. Maybe I'm not really controlling the weight. Maybe I'm not really dominating the reps, the individual reps like I should be. And if you think about our training, what is the most fundamental, most elemental aspect of our training is the rep, the single rep. I mean, we always want to think like, sets. We always say like, oh, sets and reps. What are the sets and reps? And we always think of it as groups, which is true unless we're talking about singles. Again, that's like a body, like a powerlifting thing that I think is very applicable to not just bodybuilding, but even for other powerlifters. Like even think of the attention to detail that powerlifters that we think in terms of our 1 rep maxes and our singles. How much detail we put into our bench, squat, and deadlift on our singles. Like what we look like on the platform, what we look like when we're hitting max attempts. Very, very critical. But then even a lot of powerlifters don't take that same attention to detail and put it towards their assistance work. Or put it towards even higher rep sets. Like, yeah, we dominate the 1 rep. But what about a set of 8? Do you dominate all 8 reps? Do they all look identical? Do they all look as good as they possibly could? And technique is something that'll always evolve. Like it's never going to be like, it's never like, I know how to do it now. Like even when you become an advanced lifter, you're always going to change your technique a little bit. Look to tweak it here and there, maybe get a little bit better. And as your body changes, your leverages change, you gain weight, you lose weight, your mobility changes, your technique's going to have to change a little bit. That's okay. Sometimes it's going to change for the better. Sometimes when you watch a bunch of Instagram videos, you pick up bad habits from people. I've seen that. I've seen that with my clients sometimes. It's like, I know who you've been following. You're picking up bad habits from Instagram. No joke. But I think it's important. We gotta break it all down to the fundamentals. Really, no matter what topic we're talking about, break it down to the fundamentals. What's like the most basic level? Let's make sure we can do that good first. The rep. Let's make sure we can do the reps good. And then we'll start talking about other things. But let's dominate that rep first. It's a good place to start. It's actually in my books why I put so much emphasis on technique. Like, whenever I would buy a book, that was one of the things I always did question, was you'd get a book and it would have a bunch of exercises in it. And then the part of the book where the author would recommend, like how he recommends to do the exercises, would be very brief. Like, it would be like just like bullshit, like description of how to do the exercise. And I'm like, this is pointless. Like, why would you waste pages in your book and just put like no one's gonna get anything out of it. Like, you put like the most basic description of how to do an exercise. I didn't want to do that when I write my books. I want to like really, really detail like each exercise on the things to avoid, the common errors I see. Very detailed on how to go from like right from the unracking the bar to the full rep to re-racking the bar. Like, I want to have it very, very detailed because I think it's important. I think dominating the rep and really controlling the rep and emphasizing the rep is really, really important. Remember, lifting's a skill. Technique's a skill. The more you do it, the more practice you get, the better you often become. Use your warm-up sets to practice. That's like probably the perfect time to practice because you don't really have much weight on the bar. You should be able to handle the weight very, very easily. It's something that no stress to do. It's just lightweight, perfect opportunity to practice technique. And every single time we're lifting, our warm-up sets should be practice technique sets. That's why I don't like it to see when people, when they're warming up, they like exaggerate bar speed. It's like, oh, I want to lift everything explosively. It's like, okay, I get that. I get the idea of compensatory acceleration. I do. But when you just have the barbell and you're deadlifting and you deadlift really fast and then you drive your hips into it and the bar swings 3 feet in front of you, like, how applicable is that to your deadlift? Like, if you're really worried about being explosive, do some box jumps before you start deadlifting. If you want to be explosive, do a couple box jumps. Do a standing long jump. That's how you get explosive. And then once you get to the barbell, control it and do it like you would do if there was weight on it. Same with 135. Put 135 and just rip it up and like bounce your hips off from it and swinging all around and you get out of position because you moved way faster than you normally move. No, I don't recommend that. Same with bench press. You see people jump onto a bench and just start flailing the bar around. Like, come on. Like, that's not good practice. That's not good technique. Even with the bar, control it. Put 135 on it, control it. If you want to work on being explosive, do some plyo push-ups before you start benching. Same with the squat. Same with all the assistance movements, too. Use the warm-up sets as practice. Emphasize the rep. That's something I wish I would have done. I wish I would have done right from the beginning. It's a tough sell, though. Guys, it's an ego check for 1. 2, a lot of people don't even really want to worry about it. It's like, I can do it. I know how to do this. I don't need to be taught how to do this. I know how to do it. I've seen people do it. I know how to bench press. I'm a teenage boy. I know how to bench press. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit different episode. And I have a cool announcement coming next week. You'll be hearing from me. But until next time, guys, peace. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Absolute Strength Podcast. I know I had a ton of fun producing it for you. And before you go, if you could just drop me some feedback, I'd love it. I love reading your feedback. So you can go over to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating, write a little review, what you think of the podcast. I absolutely love it. I read every single one. But it's cool if you don't want to do that. I get it. No one wants to really go out of their way to do anything, let alone write a review. But I want to get your feedback. So drop me a line on Instagram at Hunt Fitness, or on Facebook, Kyle Hunt, or on Twitter, or send a pigeon or something. I don't know. I just want to hear your feedback. So if you want to give me some feedback, let me know what you think. Hit me up on Instagram at Hunt Fitness. And before you go, I have one last thing I want to say. I have a program I want you to check out. It's actually called the Absolute Strength Program, and the link is in the show notes. It's a program I designed to help increase my own squat, bench, and deadlift. And I got pretty strong off of it, and I think you're going to like it. It's a great book. Thousands of people have got amazing results from it. It's in the show notes. All right, guys. Until next time, until next episode, peace.